Okay, in the last lesson we learned how to factor trinomials when the lead coefficient was 1. Today we're going to change that lead coefficient to something else. So our process becomes a little bit different. When the lead coefficient was 1, we were just looking at factors of c, the constant term. Now we're going to look at factors of a times c. So the first and easiest step is to multiply those two numbers together. What's 2 times 3? 6. Awesome. Now we're going to look for factors of 6 that add up to negative 7. Now since they multiply together to be positive 6, they have to have the same sign. Since they add up to be negative, they have to both be negative. So what two factors of 6 add up to negative 7? Negative 6 and negative 1. So what we do is we split our middle term, our 7x, into a negative 6x and a negative 1x. So we're kind of uncombining like terms. We're splitting that middle part into two pieces, and it doesn't matter which order you put it in. The negative 6x minus 1x, you could have done negative 1x minus 6x. It'll change the look a little bit, but the result will still be the same, or at least equivalent. Then we use that method that I previewed the other day called factoring by grouping, where we take the first pair of terms and we factor out the greatest common factor. What's the greatest common factor? 2x. And what's left over when we take out 2x? X and negative 3, or x minus 3. Now the key is to factor something out of the second group that leaves us with the same thing in parentheses. It leaves us with an x minus 3. So what can I factor out there that'll leave me with an x minus 3? Negative 1. A negative 1 will make that a positive x and a negative 3. So when that first term is negative, most of the time you're going to want to factor out a negative with it. You're not going to want to just take out 1, you're going to want to take out negative 1. So now we've got essentially two terms here. This piece and this piece. And what do those two terms have in common? X minus 3. And when I take x minus 3 out, what am I left with? 2x minus 1. Yep, they're not being multiplied, they're being added. The book goes through a very different approach for this. It's more of a guess and check method, and I don't like it. This is a very systematic approach that works every time and relies less on being able to guess at the right answer. So if you're following along in the book, you're probably not going to see the connection between the two. Everybody get this method, okay? The nice thing about it is they break the first 3 examples in the book up into different methods based on what signs are. If you follow this method, it doesn't matter what the signs are, okay? You can just use the same method every time. So here we have, the next one is 3n squared plus 14n minus 5. So what's our first step? What was the first step we did in the last one?
Multiply 3 and 5. Negative.
Yeah, it's important that you keep the sign with it, because what do we get when we multiply 3 and negative 5?
Negative 15.
Negative 15. So we're looking for factors of negative 15 that add up to 14. So since they multiply together to be negative, they're going to have opposite signs. Since they add up to positive, the bigger one's got to be positive. 15 and negative 1. So we're going to split that into 3n squared plus 15n minus 1n. Again, it doesn't matter. You could have done negative 1n plus 15n. As long as the signs go with the numbers, it doesn't matter which order you put them in. So you should be able to see the connection between the first and third lines here. If I add like terms in my third line here, I get back to my first line, right? So then we look at factoring by grouping. What can I factor out of the first two terms here? 3n. What am I left with?
3n times n plus 5.
3n times n plus 5. What do I factor out of my second group? Negative 1. What does that leave me with?
N plus 5.
N plus 5. What do those two sections have in common?
N plus 5.
And what am I left with when I take the n plus 5 out?
3n minus 1.
3n minus 1. Just whatever's in front of each parenthesis. Make sense? Now the nice thing about it is if you're not sure if you've done it right, you could check. How would you check? Multiply it back out. Foil it out and see if you get to where you started. So if we foil, what do we get when we multiply our firsts? 3n squared. What do I get when I multiply my outsides? Negative n. Outsides, that's n and negative 1. How about insides?
15n.
15n.
Negative 5.
And lasts give us negative 5. When we add like terms, we get 3n squared plus 14n minus 5, which is exactly what we started with. Make sense? All right. Now they're going to throw one little curveball at you that you kind of saw in the homework last night, if you did it. They're going to put a negative out front. Now, the easiest way to take care of that is to factor out a negative 1 first. Just factor out a negative 1, and you don't even have to write the 1, you can just factor out a negative. If you divide that negative out of negative 4x squared, what does that become?
4x squared.
What does the 12x become? Minus 12x. What does the 7 become? Minus 7. And then basically you start over with what's inside the parenthesis. You just have to make sure that this negative stays all the way through to the end because it's still part of the expression. Okay? So we're going to factor what's inside the parenthesis using the same steps we've been using. What's our next step?
4 times 7. Negative 7.
Which is negative 28. What factors of negative 28 add up to negative 12? We know they're going to have opposite signs, and the bigger one's got to be negative. So you got a limited number of options. You got 1 and negative 28, 2, negative 14, 4, and negative 7. Which pair adds up to negative 12? 2 and negative 14. Right? So that's going to go in our blanks there. We're going to have a plus 2x minus 14x. What do we factor out of the first pair?
2x.
And what's left?
Wait, yeah. Just 2. Plus x.
No.
Just 2?
No. What do I get when I divide 2x by 2x?
1.
1. Remember, we're dividing, so something's got to fill in that space there. You can't divide and get 0. So 2x divided by 2x has got to give me 1. What do I factor out of the second pair?
7.
Negative 7. And what am I left with?
2 negative 2. No, 2x. Minus 1 plus 1.
Plus 1. Negative 7 divided by negative 7 is plus 1. So if you do it right, those two inner parentheses should match. If they don't match, you did something wrong. Okay? It's not going to factor right. So what do those two have in common? 2x plus 1. And what are we left with?
Negative 2x minus 7.
Let's leave the 2x minus 7, and we'll put that other negative from here
In between.
out front. No, if we put it in between, it'll look like we're subtracting it. We put it out front so we know that we're multiplying. Okay? So that negative carried all the way through. We got our factorization. So if we distribute out those two parentheses and then multiply the negative through, we should get back where we started. Make sense? Alright, now it's time for you to try one. Negative 5m squared plus 6m minus 1. Give that a shot. Our first step should be to factor out that negative. Make it 5m squared minus 6m plus 1. Then we're looking for factors of 5 times 1, or 5, that add up to negative 6. So the factors of 5 that add up to negative 6, what are they? Negative 5 and negative 1. So we split that negative 6m and negative 5m and negative 1m. What do we factor out of the first pair? Negative or positive 5m. Which leaves us with m minus 1. What do we factor out of the second pair? Negative 1. They don't both have an m, so I can't take an m out. Leaves me with m minus 1. So when I factor out a m minus 1, I'm left with 5m minus 1, and I've still got that negative out front to hang on to. Any questions? All right.